of the pyramid. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Sri Shashi Tharoor ji.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, some in the BJP are hailing this as a dream budget. I have to agree, Mr. Chairman, because after all, a dream is something that's completely divorced from reality. I have a fundamental problem with the budget of my good friend, Mr. Jaitley. First, it's wildly optimistic numbers and projections. And second, the gap between the government's ambitious objectives and the budget funds allocated to achieve them. Let me explain my concerns about each. First, on the numbers, this government is noted for its bold numbers and bolder ambitions, which are frankly too good to be realistic. Our growth projections for 2016 have been etched between 8.1 and 8.5%, which is contrary to the IMF's already optimistic forecast of 7.5. Similarly, the government in its maiden budget had predicted a GDP growth of 13.4% from its advanced estimates, but only attained a growth of 11.4%, so it fell short by 2 percentage points. So I remain doubtful of the government's wisdom at projecting such a figure when the industry and job growth continue to be sluggish and benefits from falling oil prices may not continue in the near future. The fact is that Achhe Din haven't dawned yet. The decline in global oil prices is partially responsible. Commodity prices, which account for 51% of our country's imports, have all gone down. And this has improved our current account, controlled inflation, and thereby increased our GDP growth. But the government can hardly take credit for these changes. In fact, they've gone and offset the declining oil prices by levying an additional cess of 6 rupees at the petrol pump, which is up from 2 rupees, and this has directly hit the Aam Aadmi. Now, the grandiose ideas of the government are to receive funding from these completely unrealistic estimates listed in the receipts budget. They say they're going to get tax collections of 10 crores. What radical reforms has the government initiated that would actually motivate people to pay this level of taxes? Even the GST isn't going to come in on this fiscal year. So how does the government justify its predicted increase in revenue collections? This year, there's actually a tax revenue shortfall of 68,975 crores. In fact, if we continue, we actually have a continuing high fiscal deficit, mainly because of low revenue connections, which are in fact much lower than the figures projected by the government in its overambitious maiden budget. So where's the extra revenue going to come from? And which bits of the family's silver are going to be sold for the strategic disinvestments worth 28,500 crores? The government doesn't say, the budget doesn't say. Very frankly, Mr. Chairman, the numbers don't add up. At the same time, the government proposes to flood the country with projects: infrastructure development, manufacturing, employment guarantee, round-the-clock power, housing for all, poverty alleviation, total sanitation and hygiene, all while allegedly maintaining fiscal discipline. Now, what kind of magic show are we being offered? Is there a PC Sarkar sitting in the North Block to wave a wand? An exhaustive list of expenditures and insufficient resources really makes us worry, Mr. Chairman, about how the government can possibly fulfill its promises. The finance minister's speech was fine. As often with this government, sound bites, rhetoric are fine. That's what they're good at. But in the face of a lack of adequate resources, abetted by low tax collections, a dangerously high fiscal deficit, and weak corporate spending, it's not enough. You give us a fine vision, how do you implement it? That's where the challenge lies. And I'm afraid we have real concerns on the ability of the government to manage its finances. Why do I say this? The government began its tenure when the UPA left with a cash balance of 72,637 crores and an investment surplus of 50,000 crores. You know what they've left with at the end of the second quarter of this fiscal year? Cash balance of 10 crore and investment surplus of 19,000 crore. So 72,600 crore has come down to 10 crore, and 50,000 crore surplus have reduced to 19,000 crore, and now we are supposed to trust the government to manage our taxpayers' money. In fact, the government is also borrowing. 98.9% of the budget estimate has already been borrowed. And in fact, they are going to be borrowing above the budget estimate for the previous year. So where is any prudent financing in this budget? Can we trust the government to optimally use taxpayers' money? Now, Mr. Moily has already explained our concerns about the way in which the government is selling the Finance Commission recommendation of giving 42% instead of 32% of revenues to the states. The problem is that they've actually not done anything about increasing money to the states. They have simply reduced the central allocations to balance it. So the fact is that the states will receive an increased share of the union taxes, but they'll have a greater financial burden in implementing central schemes. So you announce the projects, but you don't fund them. That's what's happening, Mr. Chairman. The onus of social development has been shifted to the states without an equitable increase in their finances. Many states have already passed their budgets. They've already allocated funds under the old system. So we are actually jeopardizing their ability to do their work. The finance minister has basically shrugged off social sector responsibilities under the garb of cooperative federalism. To give you one example, the panchayats been the worst affected under this budget. We had given UPA 70,000 crore to this government. This government previous year said 3,400 crore. Present budget, 94 crore. How are the panchayats going to function, Mr. Chairman? So if you look at the sector-specific allocations, it's a very dismal portrait. Make in India is being talked about, not at all clear what incentives they're giving to attract high investments for manufacturing facilities, especially at a time when incomplete projects costing 18 lakh crores, about 13% of GDP, have tied up our public and our private funds. Now, Mr. Jaitley, in his speech, pointed to three major successes, quote-unquote, of his government: the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, the transparent auction of coal blocks, and the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. Let's take each of these in turn, Mr. Chairman. The success of the Jan Dhan Yojana is questionable. The government claims to have ensured financial inclusion of 100%, but they leave out the urban poor, beggars, rag pickers, slum dwellers, small vendors. The homeless are all left out, but that's okay, not 100% inclusion. But still, you boast about 12.5 crore new bank accounts. 73% of those bank accounts have zero balance, Mr. Chairman. How does an empty bank account help change anyone's life? Next, number two is the coal auctions. They were imposed by the Supreme Court, but are being portrayed as a policy preference of the NDA. Okay, we'll listen to that. But their efficacy must be judged by whether coal gets to the power stations that are currently starved of fuel sources and whether we cut back on our imports of coal. On that, the jury is still out. And as for the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, this is increasingly looking like a series of photo ops with grandees picking up brooms for the camera on Gandhi Jayanti and never touching them again until the next camera rolls around. Toilets are being constructed, but are they being used? Are they being cleaned? Is there water and electricity in these toilets? Surveys suggest that the real figures for use are dismal. I'm shocked to discover that the central allocation to the Swachh Bharat mission in the coming financial year will be 3,500 crores, less than the current allocation of 4,260, but even much less than the originally promised 134,000 crore over 5 years. With this amount of money, the government will not be able to fulfill its promise of building a toilet for every household in the next 5 years. It is impossible. But why should we be surprised, Mr. Chairman? In Gujarat, the then Chief Minister, Mr. Modi ji, could only achieve a 1 percentage point reduction in rural open defecation between 2001 and 2011, 1%. Why should we expect him to do better in the national level than he did in his own state? At that rate, with these policies and this budget, India will take more than 50 years to eliminate open defecation. When I accepted the Prime Minister's kind invitation to be one of his original brand ambassadors for Swachh Bharat, I warned that photo ops might raise public awareness but would not solve the problem without serious central government investment in sanitation infrastructure. This budget allocation doesn't do that. It's far worse than I feared. It is a betrayal of the hopes raised by all these photo ops. It merely provides the government an excuse and the Prime Minister an excuse to wash his hands of the sanitation issue altogether. The Finance Minister actually clapped himself on the back over what he, echoing the economic survey, called the JAM Trinity, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and Mobile, to implement benefits through direct transfer. But this JAM was actually the UPA's bread and butter. These are all schemes devised by the UPA government, sneered at by the opposition at the time. And I'm sure it's too much to hope for Mr. Jaitley to acknowledge this. But let me point this government back to the real India, the rural poor. Our rural economy is witnessing a slacking labor market, with rural wages registering an annual growth of 3.8%, whereas under UPA, sir, we had the highest growth at 26%, and an average growth of 18% during the 5-year period 2009 to 2014. We've come from an average growth of 18% to 3.8% today. The government just declares new schemes, doesn't fund them. We are told all MPs have been urged to contribute to the Adarsh Gram Yojana. But if you ask where the money is, you're told use existing schemes. And if the existing schemes have not made the Grams Adarsh, will a government declaration be enough? I'll wrap up in 2 minutes, Mr. Chairman. The basic point is effective measures to help the poor, particularly the rural poor, have simply not been introduced. And of course, the government has slashed the allocation for agriculture by 25% from the previous budget estimate. And agriculture has only grown by 1.1% this year. So what's going to happen? More and more rural poor will be pushed out of the land. They'll come to our limited urban areas where the NDA government can offer them slogans about make in India. They need to make it in India, but for that they need real jobs. Where are these coming from? Slogans and sound bites don't make factories run. And they also talk about creating a single national market for agriculture. But Mr. Chairman, how can they do that when they're also talking about cooperative federalism? I have no idea. Let me just quickly wrap up, Mr. Chairman, with 2 last points. One is the gap between their plans, whether it's creating aims, whether it's non-renewable energy. All their objectives are not matched by any numbers in the budget. I'm happy to give the details to the minister if he wants. They simply don't match. The health outlays have actually come down at a time when we need better health. They've gone and banned a BBC documentary on rape, but they've slashed the funding for the national rape crisis centres, announced just last year, from 244 crores to a mere 18 crores. That is a much more unkind cut than any cut in the BBC's editing rooms. Let me conclude by saying that you can't, for example, announce IITs, including one in my state, Mr. Chairman, by actually pledging to give 1,000 crores for 5 IITs when each IIT is 2,200 crores to be paid over 7 years. It's simply not realistic, Mr. Chairman. So let me just say finally, our future generations, last sentence, our future generations will pay the price for this budget. As Muzaffar Razmi has observed, ye jabar bhi dekha hai taarikh ki aankhon ne, ye jabar bhi dekha hai taarikh ki aankhon ne, lamhon ne khata ki thi, sadiyon ne saza pai. This is what is going to happen to all of us. Jai Hind, Mr. Chairman.
Shri Kirit Somaya ji.